Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on behalf of a special partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is December 21st, 2022, the day of the winter solstice, and if you would like additional weather information on top of what I provide with this broadcast, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. It'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii in the lower left. If you put your cursor on there and click, it'll give you a forecast and any watches, warnings, or advisories for anywhere in the country. A quick check of the map this afternoon. For the lower 48, there is a major winter storm that's going to produce heavy snowfall, strong winds, even blizzard conditions across areas of Minnesota, Iowa, in through the western Great Lakes, including western and northern lower Michigan. And that system will arrive just prior to the Christmas holiday. We have a similar scenario shaping up where a winter storm is going to impact the Panhandle just before Christmas. But before then, large Arctic high pressure that's situated over the Yukon and Northwest Territory has a central pressure right now above 1060 millibars and is producing bitterly cold temperatures across the eastern interior. In the far western end of things, heavy rain and flooding continues in the eastern Aleutians around Unalaska. Dutch Harbor area has picked up over 6 inches of rainfall the past couple of days, with some reports of minor flooding and even debris flows over a few of the roads. Strong winds are going to set up as the pressure gradient tightens between the Canadian high pressure and then a broad area of low pressure frontal system and a series of lows that work their way out of the North Pacific on up all the way back across the eastern Aleutians. And that's the system that will eventually, a series of lows will approach the Panhandle and Gulf here as we go through later Thursday night, Friday, and Saturday, with heavy snowfall likely, especially through areas of the Panhandle from south to north. And today was the winter solstice. It occurred shortly after noon at 12:48 p.m. Alaska Standard Time. And so from this point on, we are slowly going to be coming back into the light. A quick check of some of the FAA webcams. We have Dutch Harbor, where there is steady moderate rain and wind, a temperature at 43 degrees. As I mentioned, over 6 inches of rain has fallen, with another at least 1 to 3 inches of rain expected this late Wednesday afternoon through midday Thursday. Fort Yukon, clear skies, very cold temperature as of early afternoon, 47 below zero after a low this morning of 51 below. And very cold temperatures will continue up that way here through the Christmas holiday. Palmer, mostly clear, shouldn't be 45. It's colder than that. That was a temperature I meant to put in for the Aleutians. Nevertheless, in through the Matanuska Valley, we are expecting stronger east-northeast winds to develop on Friday. Some wind gusts could be up around 60 miles an hour with blowing snow, especially as you travel eastward up in through the Copper River Basin. And then across the icy strait, Sisters Island, near Hoonah, mostly cloudy 19, and heavy snow will be developing in that area, especially early Friday morning and increasing throughout the day on Friday. Here are the current advisories and warnings. We have a blizzard warning in effect for the eastern Arctic coast for tonight into tomorrow morning. Kaktovik, expect light snowfall with strong winds creating those blizzard conditions. We have wind chill advisories and winter weather advisories for the central interior for the winds and some blowing snow, Bettles, Tanana, and also an air quality alert for Fairbanks into Thursday afternoon. Further south, the Copper River Basin and areas of the Matanuska Valley, including Palmer, will see strong east-northeast winds develop on Friday that'll lead to blowing snow as well as some gust that'll be up around 60 miles an hour. And then finally, across the Panhandle, we have winter storm warnings for most areas. Ketchikan northward through Juneau, winter storm watch for Haines and Skagway. The onset of the The snow will be a little delayed there, but conditions will deteriorate across the Panhandle with a series 2-3 different lows that are going to impact that area with a frontal band as we begin very late Thursday night and especially Friday into Saturday. Further west, the flood warning continues for Unalaska Dutch Harbor area through at least Thursday early afternoon, as we expect an additional 1 to 3 inches of rainfall tonight and through the first half of Thursday. Here's a picture out of Dutch Harbor. Lauren Adams with Public Radio KUCB showing some minor flooding. We've had some reports of some debris flows across roads due to the heavy rainfall and the runoff associated with that. Looking at the satellite imagery, you can see a very impressive curl band in the clouds, and it kind of marks a frontal system that extends along the lower Gulf North Pacific interface that then cuts across the tip of the Alaska Peninsula back up into the lower Bering. We have a couple of different low pressure centers associated with that, and then eventually a couple of other lows are going to come up out of the North Pacific and move up into the Gulf and really bring a surge of moisture that's going to bring the heavy snow and windy conditions to the Panhandle, as I mentioned here, for the end of the week, just prior to Christmas. So again, we can see the counterclockwise circulation, broad area of cloudiness lifting out of the North Pacific, and once we get to the weather maps, you can kind of better see this. Impressive 1062 millibar high there over the western Yukon this afternoon, and low pressure 964 low coming out of the North Pacific south of the Alaska Peninsula, and another low back toward the western Aleutians, and a push of warmer air coming out of the North Pacific, trying to lift up into the colder air that's over the northern Gulf. So later tonight into Thursday morning, the main low for the time being is going to be situated there just to the southeast of Dutch Harbor, and that low with a warm front extending ahead of it, we're going to see an expanding area of precipitation out over the North Pacific and lower Gulf. And as we get into Thursday, some of that snow will begin to spread north into the southern Panhandle and increase in intensity late Thursday night and Friday morning, and then eventually overspread the Panhandle on Friday with heavy snow and wind. Pressure gradient really tightens between the high. The Yukon high will weaken a bit, but with that strong pressure gradient, very strong winds, Copper River Basin on in through the Mananuset Valley. As I said, some wind gusts could be up around and even a bit over 60 miles an hour, creating quite a bit of blowing snow there along the Glen Allen Highway. And the frontal system extends all the way back out into the eastern Aleutians and lower Bering. So temperatures Thursday morning, still quite chilly. Northern Panhandle single digits, could be 41 below or so there at Glen Allen in the Copper River Basin. And then Thursday afternoon highs coming up to near 30, the outer Panhandle coast. Only 25 below for a high there at Glen Allen. Teens in through the Anchorage Bowl, 42 at Kodiak. And then Friday morning lows still well below 30 below there in through the Copper River Basin. And temperatures below freezing across the Panhandle with precipitation falling as snow. Could mix with some rain or sleet in through the outer coast, Sitka down toward Craig. But otherwise, much of the central northern Panhandle will be in heavy snow and wind. And for Thursday, look at these cold temperatures again, 50 plus below Northway and for Yukon. And Thursday afternoon, the coldest temperatures continuing there across the Yukon flats. And as you get down there along the Alcan border in through Tok and Northway. Further west, temperatures Thursday afternoon, 15 at Nome, 25 at Savutka. And then Friday morning lows, a little improvement there in Fort Yukon, but still 54 below. The forecast low for Northway, and temperatures along the Arctic coast sub-zero, 5 below to 15 below, and daytime highs still bitterly cold there across the Yukon flats and areas along the Alcan border through the eastern and southeast interior. Extending out along the southwest, sub-zero temperatures as you go up the Yukon and Kuskokwim rivers, lows near 40 through the lower Alaska Peninsula and the eastern Aleutians. Temperatures Thursday afternoon, warmest from Kodiak Island down through Sandpoint and Dutch Harbor. Friday morning lows still sub-zero through the mid and upper Kuskokwim Basin on the west side of the Alaska Range. Temperatures, though, near and above freezing from Kodiak, again, back across the Alaska Peninsula in through the Aleutian Chain. And temperatures Friday afternoon, still single digits in teens southwest interior, but generally above freezing as you extend out along the Alaska Peninsula and through Kodiak Island. Temperature forecast December 27th through December 31st. Temperatures are expected to average above normal across the Panhandle, especially southern areas, and below normal over the northwestern half of the state, especially from Bethel through Kotzebue and Utqiagvik. And precipitation is expected to average above normal from around Cook Inlet, the east side of the Alaska Range extending in through the Panhandle, with near normal precipitation anticipated across the west side of the state through the Yukon Valley on up to the Arctic coast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's now time for your aviation weather, and of major concern we have is a series of low pressure systems that are going to be lifting out of the North Pacific. In addition, we have a very strong Arctic high pressure over the lower Yukon and Northwest Territories with a central pressure up around 1060 millibars. So this is going to provide a very tight pressure gradient across the Gulf back through the Alaska Peninsula, very brisk east-southeast flow. One of these lows will retrograde back toward the northwest up into the eastern Aleutians on Thursday, and then a couple of lows are going to be lifting out of the North Pacific up into the Gulf and provide the potential for a major winter storm for the pre-Christmas time frame here across the Panhandle with heavy snow and strong winds. So Thursday afternoon, notice the IFR conditions expanding across the lower Gulf, North Pacific interface, and then along east side of Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula, and then especially out over the lower portion of the Bering, including St. Paul and St. Matthew. And then as we go into Friday morning, because of the front that's kind of just sitting out there over the Gulf, we're going to see IFR conditions begin to creep northward up into the Panhandle as heavier snow spreads northward along with strong winds. And then finally, on Friday afternoon, we expect widespread IFR conditions across the Panhandle in areas of heavier snowfall, and that IFR continues back out through the central Gulf all the way back toward Kodiak Island and just to the south side of the Alaska Peninsula. Also, some areas of IFR along the Arctic coastline, as well as east end of the Alaska Range. So for Thursday, pass conditions, Anaktuvik as well as Atigun Pass will see VFR conditions across the Brooks Range. Cold air remains entrenched with a ridge of high pressure that extends up into that portion of the state. Lake Clark and Merrill will see MVFR conditions there in the lower southwest arm of the Alaska Range. And as we round up through the central Alaska Range, Rainy Pass will be MVFR, but Windy Pass should generally hold on to VFR conditions. And that'll be the case working eastward through Isabel and Mentasta passes. Then as we drop down a little further southwest, Tanita Pass will see MVFR conditions in the morning giving way to VFR. And same thing at Portage Pass, perhaps some MVFR conditions there southward, becoming VFR during the afternoon. And then in the far northern Panhandle at Chilkoot and White, we expect VFR conditions at least on Thursday, though conditions will be deteriorating across the Panhandle from south to north later Thursday night and especially on Friday. Freezing levels Thursday morning. Surface freezing line runs across the central Bering between St. Matthew and St. Paul along just south of Lake Iliamna, and then along the Gulf Coast and the outer portion of the Panhandle through Haida Gwaii. And further toward the southwest there, we see the freezing levels aloft bump upwards to 4,000 and 6,000 feet through the lower portion of the Alaska Peninsula in association with that frontal boundary. And as a result, the greatest threat for icing will be along and just north of this frontal boundary. The northern extent of it up toward the northern portion of the Gulf above 3,000 feet. The area where we have that little higher freezing levels aloft above 7,000 feet there in the Alaska Peninsula, and especially near and south of Kodiak Island. Jet stream level winds are strongest over northwest Canada, 135 knot jet core that's located at 30,000 feet, and then bringing down to 9,000 feet or 700 millibars. Broad area of east flow across the west side of the state, the Alaska Peninsula, most noted off of the Yukon Delta, 65 to 80 knots along the Kamchatka coast. And then finally at 3,000 feet, a broad belt of southeast to easterly winds along and north of this frontal boundary that extends through the Gulf, back out through the central Bering, anywhere from 60 to 70 knot easterly flow. This is going to translate to widespread severe turbulence across areas of the lower and mid-Yukon Valley along the southwest coast, including St. Lawrence as well as St. Paul, St. Matthew, and across Nunavik Island in through Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula, especially the northern half, and then out across say Kodiak Island and the entrance to Cook Inlet. And that area of severe turbulence will actually extend out into the central Gulf along and just north of that frontal boundary, just to the southwest and west of the outer Panhandle coast and Haida Gwaii. And so keep that in mind, that travel conditions will be deteriorating here later this week, especially throughout the Panhandle. Stay tuned to later forecasts, and if you are able to get off the ground, have a safe flight.
Kind of hard to explain how important weather is to our job. I mean, it really affects everything we do.
In 2018, NOAA launches the GOES-S satellite, which takes its place in orbit as GOES-17. Working together with GOES-16, the two new geostationary weather satellites will provide constant watch over the United States and the Western Hemisphere, from the west coast of Africa all the way to New Zealand, helping monitor severe storms, wildfires, and daily weather patterns. Since its launch, NOAA's GOES-16 satellite has already demonstrated its critical capability for keeping our nation weather ready. Throughout the active 2017 hurricane season, GOES-16 delivered imagery with detail and clarity never achieved before, with 4 times greater resolution than previous NOAA satellites, and delivered this imagery faster than ever before, helping forecasters predict the path of a storm and where and when it will intensify. These accurate and timely forecasts allowed for emergency managers to prepare for evacuations, map flood areas, and save lives.
So the weather matters. The weather matters before the weather happens, and the weather matters after the event happens, because what we're able to do to prepare, allocate resources, provide information to the public through the media beforehand, and what we're able to do afterwards, how and when the waters are going to recede, so we know we can get vehicles with life-saving food and shelter equipment down a particular highway. All of that depends on the forecast.
In the GOES West position, GOES-17 will be able to provide critical data for the westernmost United States, Alaska, and Hawaii.
We're talking about getting data updates in just seconds, so we can quickly spot wildfires and closely monitor the wind direction and their intensity. The crispness of the data coming in at a faster rate will also help with fog forecasts. We can see the moment the stratus starts to develop or when it starts to move out.
Like GOES-16, GOES-17 carries a suite of advanced instruments, including tools for sophisticated earth sensing, lightning detecting, solar imaging, and space weather monitoring. As an equal partner in the sky, GOES-17 will expand coverage of the advanced baseline imager technology across the Pacific Ocean, allowing meteorologists and local officials to see severe weather systems developing in real time.
So instead of seeing something, say, this large, that as you zoom in actually gets kind of blurry, you're actually going to see something that is much more detailed.
In its GOES West position, GOES-17 will be able to monitor conditions in the western U.S. like wildfires, coastal fog, and atmospheric rivers when storms from the Pacific dump heavy rain and snow over the western U.S. GOES-17 will have a major impact on fighting wildfires in California. Up-to-the-minute information in crisp detail allows forecasters to spot fires faster than ever before, even before the first 911 calls come in, and to better track and predict the path of large, dynamic, and dangerous fires.
It's amazing to see what we can get and at the level of detail and the speed that we can get the information down into the ground that makes our decision making way more accurate.
With a view of the Pacific Ocean, GOES-17 will also provide a critical eye over shipping lanes vital to the U.S. economy, protecting cargo and passenger vessels from dangerous ocean storms. GOES-17 will also provide a high-definition view over Alaska, resulting in better weather forecasts and improved monitoring of sea ice, wildfires, and volcanic ash. The advanced baseline imager on GOES-17 can distinguish between clouds, sea ice, and snow cover, a critical need during Alaska's dark, cloudy winter months. GOES 17's geostationary lightning mapper monitors lightning flashes, including the in-cloud lightning most prevalent in severe storms, helping forecasters determine when a storm is forming, intensifying, and becoming more dangerous. Thanks to GOES 17, emergency managers will be equipped with more accurate weather predictions and faster warnings, providing a real impact, saving lives, and protecting infrastructure. Watching over Earth from 22,300 miles above, GOES S will provide vital data to our weather-ready nation.
Hi, I'm JPSS. I'm a high-tech weather satellite that orbits our planet. I do something called a polar orbit. I circle the Earth from North Pole to South Pole, over and over, while the Earth spins. While I do that, I get lots of information about what's going on around the globe. I watch storms, clouds, and rain. I take the temperature of the ocean, measure air quality, ozone health, and take pictures of the land and sea. This information is used for all kinds of things. It helps us take care of our coasts and oceans and all the amazing things that live there. It helps us monitor harmful weather events like floods and droughts and measure the health of the environment. Most importantly, it helps us predict weather 3 to 7 days in the future. That means I can be a big help ahead of storms, where future warnings are important. I send information to the National Weather Service. They use the information to create forecasts. The forecasts are shared with people all over the country to help prepare for weather emergencies. So you look to the sky and wave. I'll be flying by.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and we now conclude the show. First with the sea ice edge. Extensive ice is in place across the far north and northwestern coast, including down through the Chukchi Sea. That area of open water that was around earlier in the month now is starting to close off and fill in. And we find some open water, especially as we get south of the Bering Strait. But ice is in place also through Kotzebue Sound as well as Norton Sound. And along the southwest coast, the ice continues to expand outward away from the mainland, though. We are going to see some rather strong offshore winds out of the northeast, as high as 40 and 50 knots, especially by the time we get into Friday. And then in through the northern third of Cook Inlet, the ice has really built up with a recent really strong cold spell. And with strong northeasterly 40-knot winds come Friday, some of that ice could shift a little further southwestward into the central portion of the inlet. Looking at the southeast panhandle on Thursday, winds inner channels north 25 to 30 knots, Petersburg on up through Lynn Canal, 5 to 6 foot waves. Southeast winds, Ketchikan to 20 knots, 4 foot waves. The outer coast, southeast to east winds, they will be building to 35 knot gales south of Sitka and west of Craig. Waves running 18 to near 20 feet. On Friday, north winds continue across the northern half of the inner channels at 30 to 35 knots with waves 5 to 7 feet. Outer coast winds, many areas southeast to east, 35 knot gales with waves again around 19 to 20 feet. And for the northwestern Gulf, for Thursday, strongest winds will be there at the entrance of Cook Inlet and just northeast of Kodiak. Look for northeast to east winds to 50-knot storm force winds. As we go up into areas of Prince William Sound, northeast winds to 20 knots. Waves across the open waters of the Gulf, though, will generally be running 20 to 25 feet and as high as 11 to 15 feet through lower Cook Inlet. For Friday, strong north-northeast winds coming coming down the length of Cook Inlet to 40 knots with waves running 10 to 11 feet. 35-knot northeast winds, 7-foot waves in Prince William Sound, and off the Kenai coast, look for northeast winds 30 to 35 knots and waves near 20 feet. On Thursday, across Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula, generally storm force east winds of 50 to 55 knots with higher gusts in areas where channeling can occur, especially through the Alaska Peninsula. Waves could run as high as 25 to near 30 feet, especially there southeast of Kodiak Island in the lower southwest portion of the Gulf, and 12 feet Bristol Bay, 20 feet north of Cold Bay. For Friday, winds will generally come down to the 35-knot range from the northeast, though 40 knots there through Shelikof Strait with 11-foot waves. Waves upwards of 16 to 20 feet on the North Pacific side and 6 to 10 feet on the Bering side, including Bristol Bay. The eastern Aleutians will see winds turning more westerly, and then the rest of the chain, especially out through the central Aleutians, look for west winds 25 knots, waves 13 to 19 feet on the North Pacific side, and 15 to 18 feet on the Bering. For Friday, winds turn northerly across the eastern and central Aleutians at 20 to 25 knots. Waves generally running 10 to 12 feet on the North Pacific side and 9 to 13 feet on the Bering side. Strong offshore flow from the northeast expected along the southwest coast. 35-knot northeast winds with ice in place Norton Sound, but once you get near and west and south of Nunavik Island, 40 to 50 knot winds from the northeast with waves as high as 20 to 25 feet from St. Matthew down through St. Paul and St. George. Brisk northeasterly flow, offshore flow continues on Friday, 35 knots out of Norton Sound and 35 to 40 knots generally south of St. Lawrence to just east of St. Paul. Waves generally running 9 to 12 feet, though as high as 15 to 20 feet, St. Paul up through St. Matthew. And along the Arctic coast, winds will generally be out of the east or becoming so there on Thursday with ice in place. And winds turn northeast to north 20 to 25 knots in the lower Chukchi Sea and increase to 45 knots off the western Seward Peninsula north of St. Lawrence with waves there 15 feet. Finally, on Friday, winds generally out of the west-northwest 10 to 15 knots along the Arctic coast, 20 to 25 knots northerly through the lower Chukchi Sea, and 40 knots from the northeast north side of St. Lawrence with waves running as high as 12 feet.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.